Hello and welcome back to Bookish and welcome back to Saturday Hodgepodge, my weekly wrap-up of booktube, bookish things, stuff having to do with books, whatever I want to talk about. I feel like I have a lot to talk about today, and so this one might be a little longer than average. I think that all the time, and then I'll end up being about 15 minutes. But I wanted to take this Saturday Hodgepodge to do a tag and to talk about, do some things that were inspired by other people's booktube videos. So that's kind of what I want to do. I want to start off with a tag. This is the mirror and the window tag. And it was created by Karen Evans. And Karen has created just a great tag here. And it was something that's had me thinking pretty much since I saw her tag video. I'll leave a link to hers down below. The idea behind the mirror and the window tag is that the books we read are either, in the books we read, we either learn something about ourselves, like the book is kind of a mirror and we see ourselves in the book, or we get a window into a world that we don't belong to, and we gain greater understanding by reading books because they offer us this window into different worlds. So one of the things I thought was fascinating about this is in the beginning I thought, well, I can't think of a book that I think of as a mirror, as reflecting me, a book that I see myself in that way. I could see and think of lots of books that had characters in them that maybe I wanted to be like, but to think about a book where you feel yourself as a part of the character, where you see yourself reflected in the character, or where you see your own situation even just reflected in that character was a lot harder for me to think of. I could have picked any book, I think, to be a mirror. I mean, every history book that I read is a mirror into the past, into a world that I'm not a part of and can only experience through reading. But that mirror aspect of the tag, that was a lot more challenging. And one of the things I realized is, well, the reason why it's more challenging is that because, well, you're 53 years old. I'm not going to call myself old because I don't want Steve Donahue to yell at me anymore. But one of the truth of the matter is that I think most people change over the course of their lives. At least I hope most people change over the course of their lives. God forbid we stay the same people we were at 18 or at 25 or at 35 or at 45. That, I hope that I've continued to evolve. So what I did, instead of trying to find, one book that I thought reflected who I was as a person, I picked books that over time, over the course of my reading history, I identified with, and that I saw something about my situation reflected in. And these are not perfect, and I'm not saying that any of the situations in which the characters of these books find themselves is exactly a mirror of my own life, but I did see myself in these books. So the first one I wanted to pick up is, and man, this is going to be unusual for my channel. I don't think I hold up books by Steinbeck very often, but the first book I wanted to talk about, in which I kind of identified a little bit with what was going on, is Tortilla Flat by John Steinbeck. Now I have to tell you, funny John Steinbeck is my favorite John Steinbeck. Socially preachy John Steinbeck, not so much my favorite John Steinbeck. But Tortilla Flat is essentially about a group of friends and their kind of adventures and misadventures and their relationships with one another, and I identified with that situation. That was, when I read the book, I was in college, and it felt like my experience in college with my friends. We lived in a crappy kind of run-down house. We had, relatively mild adventures. We had this kind of thing that tied us together. Ike, it was a car. Ike. No. Hush now. We had this thing that kind of tied us together, and so I saw myself in that. I also then later, in my 20s, I read The Commitments by Roddy Doyle, which I've talked about on this channel several times, which is an excellent movie version of this that came out. But in the Commitments, I identified with the main character, Jimmy Rabbit, and I saw myself reflected in him, because what he wants is something better. What he wants is to kind of make a name for himself, to leave his mark, to do something important. And I felt that way in my early mid-20s, that was something I wanted to do, and that was kind of how I felt. I felt like the world in which I lived wasn't everything I wanted it to be, and I wanted to do something different. I wanted to be somebody, and I think I identified with that. Also, I've mentioned many times that I've read all the Patrick O'Brian, Aubrey Maturin novels, and so it shouldn't surprise you that I've picked one of these up, except in the context. So the seventh book in the Aubrey Maturin series by Patrick O'Brian is called The Surgeon's Mate, and in this book, Stephen Maturin marries the beautiful, elegant, troubled Diana Villiers, and she becomes the surgeon's mate because Stephen Maturin is a doctor, and his kind of love for Diana, which went on for kind of a long time and grew slowly, and he didn't feel that he was worthy because of his looks and his money of Diana. That really kind of spoke to me, and kind of that feeling I had and have had before I got married and have now that I'm married, about how unworthy sometimes I felt and do feel of the love of my wife, and so that kind of spoke to me. I don't want to be too cheesy about that, but I identified with the feelings that Stephen had about Diana, and his feelings that while he wanted desperately to marry this woman and to be with this woman, that somehow he was unworthy of her love. That was something I identified with. And then another book I'm going to talk about just in this video today that I just finished yesterday is The Old Man and the Sand Eel, and this is a book about a man who comes to kind of grips with some elements of his own personality and memories of his father and his grandfather, and it all kind of revolves around fishing. And I will tell you that while I'll talk about the book later, the fishing aspects and the parts of fishing that he talks about are things that really I identified with very strongly, and a lot of that just has to do with straight fishing issues. So there's that. And then, like I said, I think I could have chosen almost any book on my shelf, Jane Eyre, or I don't know, All Quiet on the Western Front, or any history book on my shelf would be a window into, a different world, a window into an experience that I didn't have. So, but I chose a book that I read this year, which had an incredibly powerful, that kind of impact, and that's Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. I can't remember a book that has really kind of put me in a time and a place as viscerally as Kindred did. So Kindred is a story of a woman from the 1970s who, in some unexplained way, time travels back to Maryland, during, I think, the early federal period of American history, where, she's sent on a mission to kind of rescue one of her ancestors from being killed, and she finds herself living the life of a slave. And the thing about it that's such a powerful window is it gives you this incredibly powerful, view into the life of enslaved people. The things we think about, the horrors that we think about, but also kind of their feelings about one another, their feelings about the people who owned them, how much more complicated that all was than it seems, I think, on the surface. And it was really powerful. And then on top of that, the main character is also involved in an interracial relationship in the United States in the 1970s, which of course carries with it its own kind of window into the difficulty of that in the 1970s. And so it's just a really powerful look, I think, into a world that certainly isn't my world. Past world certainly isn't the world that I have experienced, and in that way it really was a moving and effective book. The other thing I want to talk about today was inspired by Greg It Supposedly Fun's video that he put out, I think, a couple of days ago, which is called, hang on, I gotta find the name of it, which he called Books I Read in 2020 That More People Should Discover. So I just thought that was a great idea. He got it from, I believe, Twitter. I don't follow the Twitter account where he got the idea from, so I'm just going to credit Greg with this, and I'll leave a link to his video in the show notes down below. So I just want to pick 4 books that I read this year that I really hope and wish that more people would read and pay attention to. The first one is not going to be a surprise at all. That's Leonard and Hungry Paul by Ronan Hession. This book was just a joy. It was just a joyful, wonderful read. And again, I will tell you, I read it, in the first few weeks after we realized that we were in a pandemic, and it was kind of a great novel to read to, provide me with hope and happiness, and to, break me out of my reading slump. But I really just think this book is great. If you're looking for a book to read that will make you happy, without being silly, make you happy by introducing you to characters who to me felt very real, and situations that felt very real. I think this book, by the way, Shawn the Book Maniac did one of his Zoom interviews with the author Ronan Hession, and I will leave a link to that video down below as well. Another book I've mentioned on my channel, I think again recently, and that's House on Endless Waters by Amuna Elan. I buddy read this with Britta Bowler back in the early summer, I believe. And this is a book about identity, how we know who we are. Doesn't matter if... anyway, it's a book about identity and place and belonging. And it's just kind of an incredible, almost... I don't know, magical kind. I don't want to say the words magical because you think it's magical realism, and it's not. But it is an incredible kind of connection between the life of an Israeli author and the history of the Holocaust in Amsterdam. And it was just a really, really great book. And the more I think about it, the more I like it. It's not a perfect book, but it's a book that deserves, I think, a lot more attention. And then also a book I think I raved about over the summer. That is the book Lakota America by Pekka Haimalainen. This is a serious work of history published by Ike. Published by the Yale University Press, which uses the winter counts of the Lakota people as a primary source for history, and it is an incredibly eye-opening view into the history of the Lakota people and how they created the incredibly powerful empire which stood up to the United States government for at least a brief period of time. And there's so much more to the Lakota, to the Sioux people than we oftentimes, and then even I taught in history, in terms of their life on the plains and their dominance of the northern plains and things like the Battle of Little Bighorn, etc. It's an incredibly complex and rich history, and this is just a great book, I think, that brings that out. And then also, early this year, I think in February, I reviewed this book, You Never Forget Your First, a biography of George Washington by the historian Alexis Coe. And I wanted to mention this book again because it is a biography of George Washington, and you may be thinking, well, why the heck do we need another biography of George Washington? And why is that a book you think it needs more attention? I think it needs more attention because of the approach it takes to its subject. It is a fun approach to Washington's life without giving up addressing some of the serious issues from Washington's life, like Washington's ownership of slaves and his attitude towards slavery. The dogs have moved to my daughter's bedroom, which is right there, to bark out the window now. Bad timing on me filming this video. Anyway, so it's a somewhat irreverent biography of George Washington, which kind of intentionally summarizes or shortens down the parts of the Washington biography you know to bring emphasis to parts you may not know. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I definitely think it's a book that needs more readers. So there you go. There's the books that I read in 2020 that I think should be getting more attention. Is that what Greg called it? I keep forgetting the name. Books I read in 2020 that more people should discover. Those would be my 4 choices. Thanks, Greg, for that inspiration. Also, as I mentioned, I did finish The Old Man and the Sand Eel by Will Millard. This is a book which I thoroughly enjoyed, but I'm not sure I would recommend to anyone who doesn't enjoy fishing. Its subtitle is My Granddad Fishing in My Quest to Find Britain's Lost Wild Waterways, which makes it seem like it's a book about nature writing. And in some ways it is, but I don't think if you don't fish, that the nature writing part of this book is going to be enough to pull you along through it. And that whole part about his, his granddad, and obviously there's a discussion here about his relationship with his grandfather, because there is. Again, if that's something you like to read about, I'm not sure there's enough of that in this book to pull you along, because it is at its heart a book about fishing. And Will Millard's kind of obsession and changing ideas about fishing. It spoke to me in lots of ways, because a lot of the thoughts that he's had about fishing, even though in Great Britain he fishes for far different fish in far different ways than I fish here in the United States, the fishing parts of the book to me were the strongest parts. I will say that this is true also of the writing. When he's writing about fishing, he's at his best. When he's trying to stretch this whole fishing metaphor into a broader kind of look at nature and nature writing and his relationship, sometimes the writing becomes, well, cheesy is the word for it. He stretches it too far. He carries his metaphors to uncomfortable places, and it can, the writing because of that can be really clunky in places. In some places it's great, in some places it's clunky. But if you do like fishing, this would be a great book to read, and I thoroughly enjoyed it for that reason. The last thing I want to talk about is, and oftentimes I do with in my Saturday videos, I make a channel recommendation. I want to recommend a channel called The Quiet Midden, and I will leave a link to the channel down below. The Quiet Midden is a channel not about books, as far as I can tell and as far as I'm able to find out so far, but it's a channel where there are nature videos, and the person who creates The Quiet Midden lives, I believe, in Alaska, and they are surrounded by nature, and they have videos of all kinds of animals that live around where they are, and in the videos I've watched recently, and I'll link below, there's no talking, it's just the sounds of nature and the views of these gorgeous animals. And in the world we're in right now, sometimes a little peace and a little communing with nature, even if it's through a video screen, can be really healing. So I'll leave links to The Quiet Midden's last 3 videos down below. Anyway, there you go. There's my Saturday hodgepodge. Sorry if it was confused and too often dog interrupted, but let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and as always, thank you for watching.